welcome all to the session on reliable knowledge. And I'd like to start by explaining why we have posed a session on reliable knowledge. And that's kind of an odd subject in education, but why we think it's really important. It started back in 2009 when the Academy decided we should draw up a strategic planning program for the next 10 years of work with the Academy. And we used the first report, which was unanimously adopted by the board. And they asked us to go further and say, please tell us your program of work for the next 10 years. And one of the members of the committee said, you know, I have a question to start with. What is the Academy's idea of reliable knowledge? And there was silence in the room. It sounds like a very logical question, but the more we talked about it and thought about it, the more we realized how important it was and how difficult it was to answer. And just to illustrate the topic a little, when the brilliant scientists who founded the Academy, people like Einstein, who, in the interest of saving the world, wrote to President Roosevelt that we have to develop an atomic bomb before the Germans do. He thought he was doing the greatest, most beneficial thing for the world. And when Robert Oppenheimer led the Manhattan Project, he thought he was calling people to stand behind the future of humanity by doing this. And they did something phenomenal. By the time the atomic bomb was developed, the war was over. And so Einstein and Niels Bohr went to President Truman by that time and said, okay, we don't need these weapons anymore. And Truman said, no, now we have a weapon that we can protect ourselves against anybody. Well, it will only be a matter of time before the Russians also get the weapon, and what will we do then? No, that's impossible, that will never happen. Within 10 years, of course, we had the nuclear arms race, and we've not been able to stop it since. So these are the people who are rated among the most brilliant scientists of the 20th century, and I'm not minimizing their intellect, but certainly it was something they didn't know, that if they had known, they would have acted differently. So how reliable was the knowledge? They had a knowledge of nuclear fission, but not the real knowledge of the potential impact of their knowledge on society. And if you look along these lines, for 200 years, we had brilliant thinkers in the field of economics, starting from Smith and onward, working on the theory of economy and wealth production. And I wanted to leave Adam Smith out of it because he was really a moral philosopher. He's not an economist, so, but
Ricardo and Jennings.
Yeah, and Marshall and all that came afterwards, and then Friedman, who got the Nobel Prize for saying that the purpose of the business is to maximize shareholder profit. And espousing, then we had Samuelson and the econometrics, applying the rules and logic of physics to economic systems in which we could really measure value quantitatively and really know how much progress we're making in creating wealth. And then we had to wake up one day and realize that our way of measuring wealth was completely faulty. And actually the world's getting poorer all the time. that we thought our sense of value and our measurement of value was completely unrelated to reality, and if we keep going in this way, we're going to destroy the wealth of the planet. So I'm giving these just as practical examples to say, this is a really important question. And when we're talking about, we had this meeting with IEEE about 7 years ago in Italy. This was the group specializing in artificial intelligence. And we asked them, how much are you teaching your students about the social impact? This was way before ChatGPT, before the panic on generative AI. How much are you teaching your students about the potential social costs and social impacts of the technologies we're developing? And they say that has nothing to do with our engineering education. Now, I hope they would say something different today, but that was the answer at that time. So it raises fundamental questions about, do we really have the right parameters when we talk about, we seem to think we all know what knowledge is, but when we look back on it, and so the reason for this session is, if we're talking about a future education, how are we going to evaluate the knowledge that we're teaching? Not just it's not a question of how well the students absorb that knowledge and can regurgitate it or elaborate on it. It's by what standard are we going to evaluate the knowledge we're teaching? And this became a core topic for the Academy over the last 10 years. But now when we're talking about outreach to the world, it's time that we need to objectify this and really at least make explicit the assumptions we have or the premises that behind what that is. So I'd like to open it up in that context as a very practical and important thing. By what criteria or what characteristics do you think we should be considering the reliability and relevance of the knowledge we generate? And I'd like to go around with all of us, and everybody is encouraged to contribute. Alberto, we start with you.
In my opinion, we have to see an important fact. Reliable knowledge as unreliable knowledge is socially construed. If we see the history of education, and even more the sociology of education, we see how in all history, society, and also Western society, has created unreliable knowledge. How? Not teaching teachers how to facilitate learning, how to facilitate critical thinking, how to facilitate learning community, how to facilitate the co-creation of knowledge. But knowledge that is unreliable is always authoritarian knowledge. It's been used by all the religion to say that their teaching cannot be criticized because it's coming directly from God. It's been brought by a narcissistic professor up to today that intimidate with their power their student, and they have the power to flank them. So I'm involved in training, and I train in many countries, United States, Italy, Europe, medical doctor and clinical psychologists. They are graduating and they are ignorant how to recognize a survivor of trauma. And so, not because they're bad, because they're ignorant, they would not understand the symptoms that would prevent the traumatization. This is just one example. Another example is that still in Italy, economists are given a doctor in economy and they're taught to measure the national or the world product. But that doesn't at all measure prosperity, and they are reliable. And so, first of all, this is very important because also we have very many examples that have been tested scientifically to see if not only they're reliable, but the people trained with the reliable knowledge produce a different result when they do field work. And they explain these 80 years of research. But to give reliable knowledge, and this I finish, I just read my list for reliable knowledge, development. You need to give, first of all, whatever you teach, you have to insert that in a systemic environment, as is reality, not just to teach one thing, but a relation. And it has to be not only interdisciplinary, that today is even fashionable. It doesn't help if you are just interdisciplinary, if you don't teach intersectoriality and interculturality. And then if you don't teach the ethical impact on anything you do or anything you do not do, then you have to frame it, anything you do in the biopsychosocial paradigm, but also maybe go a little further, because the biopsychosocial paradigm that I like very much, it also lack the ethical and the existential or spiritual dimension. That's another, So, reliable knowledge, it's only, let's say, this is true. It's never is. This we know now, and how you think about it, you agree that we see it in the critical thinking. Otherwise, it's not reliable if I don't empower you to use your brain. And then it has to have a transparent value. It's impossible not to put value in anything that we say about reality, but they have to be transparent so people can disagree or see it with different value. Also has to be transparent power line. What the university and professors don't want to speak is about their abuse of power. Then transparent originating visions. For example, I'm in the field of mental health. Well, they don't teach in Italy the most simple and basic thing to have a critical thinking. That anything, for example, psychotherapy, there are so many, people get confused. Of course, because they don't explain the ABC, that any psychotherapy is originated by a different vision of human nature. And the different vision of human nature generate different vision of what is the ethiopathology or psychopathology, and they generate a different vision of psychotherapy. Even if you cultivate potato, if you don't have a vision of what is a potato, you cannot understand what is the potato pathology and what is the cure for it. In terms of the dramatic situation of the planet, we don't explain at any level, engineer, medical doctor, agronomist, what is the nature of our planet in the solar system and what is the pathology, which is mostly man-made destruction of environment. So the therapy, sustainability through environment can be monitorized with, Ketan Patel was telling us something very important. It's more expensive to be trying to be as much profit as possible if you invest. Sustainability can also make you much richer than pollution. So to end my list and my speech, Education, in my opinion, needs and quickly to change from professor-centered to student-centered, person-centered, and people-centered. The Bologna process to have in Europe a knowledgeable society is been already telling you, we're not doing a good job. We need to be more student-centered, to involve the student in the self-evaluation in a curriculum development. And I think that one of the main reasons why we have ample research showing that being a student-centered, person-centered, people-centered is much more effective and develops not only people as engineers, doctors, psychologists, but as active as citizens. Why is not done so much more? Because to do it, you have to renounce to the power. And people that do have power don't seem really to love to share part of their power. That's my pick.
Thank you. That was a full Nobel lecture.
What is the selection advantage of human species? Is it going upright, having emotions, cognition, the opposition of the thought, tool use? You find all these things in our species, too, one way or another. And my thought is, we humans are the least adapted to our environment. All other animals are fully adapted. We are deficit species in the sense that we always need a gap with regards to our environment activity, one way or another. And we basically close that gap with two activities. One is technology, we want to learn. And the second one is we tell each other stories about something that actually doesn't even exist, but we all believe. The story about God, for example, is such a story. We can coordinate millions and billions about God. Or money is a very good story. We all believe in a certain narrative on money, and that comes up. Coordinate billions of people every day in that direction or different. So the stories, narratives, and the technology are the two activities humans are mainly using to adapt to the reality around us, right? I think. And if that's the case, we as humans are basically operating best in the middle dimension of meters and minutes. Neither of us here in the room has an organ of perception of complexity. We cannot grasp complexity. Our brain is not built to grasp complexity. But what happens in the evolution and the history of human mankind is that this gap between humans and the environment is increasing over and over and over again. But we also are able to close that gap better and better. And the best way to close that gap in an environment which is ever increasing in complexity is using AI. Because AI is the technology that is able to grasp complexity on all different levels. So if your question was, how can we generate reliable knowledge? We should implement now, at the beginning of the 21st century, AI in a reasonable way to cope with complexity in order to close the gap. And second, to confront each other with the implicit narratives about major things like God or money.
One second. Yeah. Just to clarify, the answer is very interesting, and what you said about the complexity in AI is, I think, a great reference. We've discussed this once, but I just wanted to clarify before we get to how do we overcome our unreliability. I'd like to, we're here to define what is the problem of unreliability. You answered one of them and saying the brain is not capable of handling complexity. So that has implications. We oversimplify things. We ignore, but we build conceptual systems that ignore all the things we can't measure and say this is the reality within them. And they have externalities which don't count. So, okay, so to be aware of the limitations of our mental capacity, at least the way we've developed it now, and the bias that it implies by the methods we use and the kind of knowledge is an answer to what I said. The other is a very important topic, which we're going to have another session on. But I'd like to hear from as many of you as possible on this, so I'd like to pass it on to you.
I mean, I love to ask a question because the challenging.
I don't know which to predict.
That's Stefan. It is sure that humanity is dependent more on technology, and our whole system is now tuning to the technological advancements and artificial intelligence. In your opinion, before making my comments, in your opinion, dependency on our mind, intuitions, and inner senses are more critical and important, or depending on the advancement of artificial intelligence and technology?
That's a question. I think I would say the better we can adapt to an ever-increasing complexity with the mental frames we're using, with the narratives we're telling each other, the more appropriate the stories are that explains the reality around us, and the more appropriate the technology is we're using to adapt to an ever-increasing complexity, the more reliable the knowledge we can draw from it in order to survive in this century.
I'm honored to represent the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Institution in India, Global Institute of Integral Management Studies. I would like to introduce me as a person who is a beneficiary of various conferences arranged by Future Education and the World Academy of Arts and Science. At GIMS, we are fortunate enough that in the initial years of establishment of our institution itself, we understood that there is a huge mismatch between what we teach in the classroom and what really the logistics companies are looking for, or life situations are looking for in the logistics portion. My subject, logistics and supply chain management, is not merely a technical specialization. It is a science of life. And the knowledge obtained is valued for all fields of life. It imparts an integrated knowledge of how society works and the role of movement of goods and services as a vital, essential characteristics of life. The speaking about reliable knowledge is easy compared with translating that into the real classroom deliveries. When we try to translate this into classroom deliveries, from sharing abstract knowledge of theories to more of a life-based approach, the results were amazing. For instance, we tried very simple things to combine organizing events like marriages with logistics, organizing an international football tournament with logistics, handling calamities, natural calamities, and scientific logistics. It builds on the students' personal experience of festivals, floods, sports, to give them a deeper understanding of how society accomplishes through organizational systems, skills, and dynamic energy. It makes logistics come to life, and it presents values as an integrated, essential component of all successful work. We know about business values like punctuality, timeliness, cleanliness, regularity, orderliness, coordination, service to society, or integrity, are not merely ethical standards, but they are qualitative goals related to successful performance and accomplishment. Education thus should start from the personal life experiences of students and making any subject as integral dimensions of the wider society. Academia now is like teaching about ceremonies and legal processes of marriage and omitting the human relationship, which constitute its dynamic core and essence. Based on our experience, we define level knowledge as one with 4 dimensions. Level knowledge is something which should have contextual understanding, knowledge that is rooted in real life experiences and practical applications, allowing individuals to grasp concepts in a meaningful way. And reliable knowledge should be value-driven insight, should have value-driven insights, information that not only focus on factual data, but also emphasizes values and the impact on society, fostering holistic development. And third, adaptability to change and continuity. Knowledge that remains relevant and evolving, like Alberto told, creating critical thinkers, especially in the face of rapid technological and artificial intelligence advancements, ensuring continued applicability in various contexts. And finally, it should have a collaborative learning capacity, level knowledge that encourages peer-to-peer interaction and learning, enhancing understanding through shared experiences and teamwork. This is what I learned.
Srijit, I think it would be helpful. You're very modest in what you said, but if you explain just a little more about you started with a knowledge that was produced by the All India Confederation of Indian Industry, there's government support and big companies contributing, but it was all done as an abstract knowledge of what is logistics and supply chain management. What are the different types of modality? What are the different sizes of containers? What are the different records and procedures and all of that? And what you told us, I want to just see, he hasn't told you the story. Srijit was you can say the first experiment of World University Consortium, where he called Alberto and myself and Zschadraß to look at how he realized after a few years he's a very successful business measured by the number of students he has and he's making money. But when he evaluated what his students have learned, he came to the conclusion they're not really learning anything valuable. And what are we doing this? And so he asked to work with him. How can we convert this into something really meaningful, right? And that's what you finished the story. And what was the result of that?
I was lucky enough to have a business school established in South part of India with around 150 students in first year itself. So business was growing, I was getting money. But in the third year, companies start complaining about something. What kind of students you are sending to our company? They are not value-based. They shift their job in 3 months' time. Some of them don't have the basic knowledge of logistics and supply chain management. In your brochure, it has been told that you have international faculties, national level teachers, professors and all, what they teach. Then I had something in my mind that, initial years I'm making money. But the thing is, if this kind of complaint goes on, that my survival itself will be postponed actually. But I had the contact of Garry Jacobs. I openly discussed these things with him. He called me for attending various future education conferences, and I traveled with him in many areas. He introduced me to Alberto and they both came to my campus, and we started revamping the total curriculum of students. We changed the approach in which we take classes. That was really challenging because we had a syllabus set by Confederation of Indian Industry and some university which we were following. That was quite easy. But changing the total delivery into a student-centered way, where teachers can read only 15 to 20% of the session, and the rest of the questions, students should interact, they should discuss, they should come up with ideas, we should challenge them with the discussion forums. So this was really challenging for us. So we created a syllabus over a period of time, took some 4 years. We set some standard operating procedures for the college. We got inspiration from Marriott. Marriott has got a standard operating procedure, just like that. We framed a standard operating procedure of 1,002 pages. How to conduct classes, how to incorporate videos, how to take students outside and encourage them for experiential learning, how seniors can go to juniors and take classes. And the success, we got success when we introduced a particular topic called how Qatar is going to arrange FIFA World Cup. We took the example of how Russia arranged FIFA World Cup, and all students were participating in that particular. And we call it as live response. Live responded positively. In that particular batch itself, 118 students were got recruited to volunteer real FIFA World Cup in Qatar. 118 students. So the results were amazing. Teachers started feeling that they are doing something meaningful in the classroom. Students are coming and taking classes. Our marketing budget has considerably decreased because senior students are getting jobs and they are referring students for the junior levels. So this transformation, I think, that's why I'm telling that I'm a beneficiary of physical education conference. I tried to apply these principles with the help of the leaders of WAAS and I'm enjoying the results now. We are the largest expectation management institution.
And what you're basically talking about is as one aspect of reliable knowledge, Alberto all have mentioned different ones, is that it should be in the context of life. It shouldn't be an abstract thing applied just as a textbook learning. And that's what you did. You shifted to a knowledge where they understood it as a real practical knowledge of life, even though it was mostly in the classroom. And they understood life better than how it works. Okay. Some very good comments have come out already. I'd like to open it up for anyone else who would like to contribute. Anyone? Yes, Dennis?
So, for those that are online, my name is Dennis Norton. I'm a former member of Parliament in Ireland and a former minister. I was just taken by the last comments there regarding knowledge in the context of life. And one of the things that I did as parliamentary chair in the last Parliament was we had a number of, I was our parliamentary committee of responsibility for our offshore islands. And we had a number of research projects taking place on our offshore islands. And naturally enough, the academics wanted to tell us all about what they were doing. So we decided to turn it on its head. We actually invited the islanders to come in and present the results of the research. So we got them to explain the impact of that research on their day-to-day lives, supplemented them and backed up by the academic researchers. The point I'm making here is it's this concept of human security, where we're looking at education and research from the impact that it's having on individual lives. In this instance, we asked those individuals to provide the evidence to Parliament to justify the continuation of funding and investment in that. But to answer the broader question regarding reliable knowledge, I think it's important that knowledge is set in a context. And I think one way to do that is to instill human security within the education system, to get students to investigate how is this going to impact on the lives of their own community that they come from, of citizens, of different citizens, and challenge them in relation to their application of that knowledge and how that could either positively or negatively impact on individual communities.
Just very briefly, in continuation of what is being said so far, it seems that as knowledge is constructed and our constructions evolve and are never absolute and never correct absolutely, it's an evolutionary process, then we need criteria that are also going to be relative but applicable enough that they create some reliability. So when we think about it that way, what do we know at this level in our evolutionary development and in the evolutionary understanding of human reality and reality? We know that interdependence is a fundamental characteristic of life. And so it seems to me very much in continuation of the concept of human security that what makes knowledge reliable at this point in our understanding, which continues to evolve, is knowledge which generates, which protects interdependence, which honors and reflects interdependence, and in that way enhances human security. And maybe in centuries further, we will have even more profound understanding of reality, and we will keep reconstructing what is reliable knowledge. But for now, interdependence seems to be the most comprehensive phenomenon about life and reality that we seem to understand. And so we know that if we think for a moment about applying this criterion to what knowledge is reliable, very quickly we can see and identify piecemeal knowledge, partial knowledge, which actually not only does not support interdependence and therefore foster human security, but really pits us against each other, pits disciplines against each other, puts them into hierarchies which don't reflect necessarily the interdependent wholeness of life. And so that seems to be a pretty adequate filter right now to analyze just about everything that's gone awry with the otherwise pretty impressive body of knowledge that humanity has accumulated. We know a lot, but I think this is the key question, that in knowing so much, we are now to reach consensus on how we're going to filter through everything we've come to know and establish what is reliable knowing, what is knowing that actually advances human and planetary security, and what is knowledge that may fit a particular paradigm, but ultimately, or reflect a particular paradigm more so, but ultimately does not correspond to the wholeness and interdependence. So I'm grateful that you raised this question and that we're having this panel.
Very.
I could just,
I just want to comment and then give it to Gil, because we have, I promised them. Just because you touched on the same topic as SREEJITH did, where he talked about the evolution of society, we talked about the evolution of our ways of knowing. And I think to be conscious of the fact that our ways of knowing are evolving, and as you imply or suggest, that they keep evolving, and we should be conscious of that process and seeing where, when we talk about reliable knowledge, if we look back on all the knowledge we thought we had in the past, it's not just the correcting of a fact that's important, it's learning. What do we learn about our way of knowing and how that's evolving? And what can we conclude tomorrow from the mistakes we made today? And how we should not just correct the mistake, we should learn how our way of knowing should evolve more. So you raised a very important topic, really fascinating discussion. David.
Thank you. Well, I'm the student, we didn't have these steps, so I don't know how to practice them. Just rebounding on this issue, not that I've been giving any deep thought, but I'd like to address two sides of reliable knowledge or concept. One is what it's made up of and what it is for policymakers, and the second aspect is how you teach it. I'd say that reliable knowledge is not homogeneous, in my view. It has a core of indisputable facts. Okay? Beyond that, I think it's not as indisputable, but it has to be a number of things. It has to be educated guess. Has to be an element of it. Unforeseen consequences has to be part of it, because that is a pitfall that the best of leaders and managers fall into. Because solid, reliable policy decisions can only be made on the basis of reliable knowledge. Now, I don't need to expound on it, time there, but the key for our conference is how do we teach it? I would think that the core that part of the class is there, so it will be available, or if it's not readily available, it should be person needs to be able to discern where that information is. But beyond that, the ability to evaluate, analyze, these things can be taught. What probably cannot be taught, and that's also my experience when the judgment. Person either has judgment or not. Now, an element of judgment can be taught, but not didactically. That comes with experience. So that part can be enhanced through providing some kind of practical work. And there's a number of things that in the analysis, in order to arrive at reliable knowledge, one has to bear in mind. You have to apply objective criteria. One should not be guided by biases, whether political or informational. You have to avoid thinking in terms of double standards. I think it's very important, because that will have a negative effect on the outcome of the judgment of your analysis. So, to basically draw a bottom line, I think reliable knowledge is an absolutely essential element of management or education, and parts of it can be taught.
You said something interesting that triggered another thought. You said applying objective criteria, and I know what you mean by that. If I don't misinterpret you, to not be subjectively imposing our prejudices or our cultural biases or something like that. But there's another way of the word objective has a dual meaning, at least in usage. We talk about objective as that which we can treat like an object and see it, observe it impersonally, and we use the word objective to suggest that which is not biased.
I'm using it as an antonym to subjective.
Well, that's exactly the point I wanted to come to. And it's easier to explain by an example than by an explanation, because the words are so tricky. It's a well-known story, but FDR took over as president of the United States in 1932, the US was in the middle of the worst banking crisis it had ever had in history. About 6,000 banks had failed within 2 years. And he inherited this after the Federal Reserve had tried everything and under Hoover they could to stop it, and it was only getting worse. And first thing he did was he declared a national banking holiday. And he got on the radio 5 days later to the first of what they call his fireside chats. And he said, you know, nothing I was taught at Harvard University in economics prepared me for this situation. Because objectively, and I'm using the word the way he meant it, we have the same rich natural resources that we had that made us the most prosperous country in the world. We had the most talented, skilled, educated workforce, and we still have what we had now. We have all the same factories and all the same natural resources that we had before, but we're collapsing. And nothing I learned in economics prepared me for this. And you know, it looks to me, as I was saying as a president, not in exactly this language, that the real problem for us is not objective at all. And it's something I never learned at economics at Harvard. It's the real thing we have to fear is fear itself, is fear. And so the word subjective, which is what essentially it illustrated is, when it comes to physics and quarks and solar systems, the subjective dimension may not be, we don't know of its reality, but when it comes to human beings and human systems, we can't be just objective. We have to understand the subjective perceptions of things. And that's shown, and yet our social sciences, especially, I'm choosing economics, we don't have to single it out. Our social sciences specializes, but I think, well, I don't want to get into trouble with my psychologist here, but
He's a psychiatrist.
either I'm caught in the middle. So,
Watch out.
But the subjective dimension absolutely counts. It's not a question of who should be elected. It's what our perception. It's not a question of what the fact is. It's a question of what I believe of what he says. It's not a question of whether he's good or not. It's a question of whether I perceive he's good or not. And I think this idea that and I'm not blaming anybody or any discipline, but the idea that social science can be converted into econometrics or any purely objective phenomenon misses the fact that all our social sciences are sciences of conscious beings, you raise the point, whose subjective perceptions, whatever they are, really count, and maybe much more than the objective reality they're through. And just one other example of it, when Steve Jobs was thrown out of Apple in 1985, that's a well-known story, by Steve Scully and the board that he had appointed. I had just done a study of Apple before that. And when I did the study, my co-author, we were writing a management book, he asked me, you know, we got into 20 very successful companies, Apple was one of them, Intel was another. He said, if you had to choose which company to invest in for the next 20 or 30 years, which one would you do? And that included IBM, which was still the giant, and Coca-Cola and others. I said, well, I guess it would be Apple. He said, Apple? How can you choose Apple? It's the smallest of these companies, and there are hundreds of competitors for it. And then 6 months later, Steve was thrown out of Apple, and he said, do you still want to go by this feeling? 10 years later, Jobs was brought back into Apple and made the CEO again. And the most interesting thing was, at that time, Michael Dell was the #1 PC company in the world. He had built it from scratch. He was the top of the line. He done everything. And the press, the business press interviewed him and said, what do you think about jobs coming back to Apple? What would you advise him? He said, my advice, most successful businessman in the industry, my advice on jobs would be that you liquidate all the assets of the company and return them to the shareholders, because Apple doesn't have a prayer in the world of competing in the commodity computer business. And Michael Dell was a great accomplished individual, there's no question about it. But he turned out within 10, 12 years, Apple was the most profitable company in the history of the world. So what does that tell us about reliable knowledge? Michael Dell was looking through a conceptual system. He had certain assumptions of what the business was. Oh, Apple, he thought, was in the commodity computer business. And later, Steve Jobs said, we're not in the commodity computer business at all. We're in the business of meeting human needs.
That is a really important example. But if you allow me to make another couple of examples that give you another totally different picture, can I?
Yeah, of course.
England, in the English colony, was intentionally, totally falsifying the geography and teaching the students in the colonies that Italy was under English dominion, France, Spain, Russia was under English dominion. So the reliable knowledge would be, well, we are in our country under English dominion. So everybody else, that's reality, that's normal. In 1714, I'm not sure, in Trento, Italy, there was the concilium of the Catholic Church. And one of the votations was, are women human beings or are the devil creature put on the planet by the devil through their sexuality to have men commit mortal sin and lose their soul? There are thousands of these examples teaching it. For example, what is going on even nowadays? I don't know, in many countries, Russia, but Russia, yeah, of course, Florida, where teaching evolution is forbidden, and they teach that the planet is 5,000 years old. So look at the power lines, look at who's gaining power or economy. Sometimes people are totally blind, and the opposite is there are so many different ways why we make our reality, of course, a dream, but often a nightmare.
Thank you.